So there'll be plenty of places that will look at this as an opportunity. Those three airlines in particular, Qatar, Etihad and Emirates, have really dominated that use of cities as a transit hub for longer routes. But there will be other places that could work for it as well that will start to step in, and business travellers and leisure travellers will look at those places and those airlines. So Finnair is a great one, flying via Helsinki over the top of Russia to Japan. From there you could then get to plenty of other places. You've got Istanbul in Turkey, which has actually been a transit hub for quite a long time. Lufthansa, KLM, Air France, British Airways, they've always been good at this. And others that people may not consider, but Addis Ababa Airport in Ethiopia has always been a well-reputed airport. Could this be an opportunity for them to expand out? So maybe, rather than having political divisions of airspace and travel routes, you will have effectively second and third tier places that swap around all the time, depending on what the situation is going on. And then creating a globally connected system, you do want some redundancy. We've seen what happens when this single area closes off. Business and leisure travellers, the travel industry, the tourism industry, all of these different people coming together will want some kind of redundancy in the system, which creates opportunity for these other places.
Ash, why is the Middle East air corridor so important for travel?
There's a couple of different reasons why. One is that it's just on the line of the shortest route between many different places. So if you're flying from Europe to Southeast Asia, to India, or onwards even to Australia, obviously you need to change somewhere else. It's just kind of on the way. So if that airspace is closed, any aircraft would have to go around it. That's the first thing. And the second is that over the last quarter of a century, but particularly the last 10, 15 years, the Gulf states, so the United Arab Emirates, particularly Abu Dhabi and Dubai, but also Qatar in Doha, have become really important transit hubs. So they have built an industry partly to encourage people to visit those places that makes it affordable and easy to change flights there for flights that you can't do in a single leg. And a lot of airlines, such as the Indian Airlines, use that as their stopping point rather than using their bases in the Western Hemisphere. So, or at least in Europe, they don't do it in Paris or London. They'll do it in those Gulf cities instead. So when those airports are closed down, then it's not just the overflights that are struggling, but any of the flights that transit and connect through those cities. So you have huge knock-on effects, because if you have all of your scheduling based on the amount of time it takes you to fly from, say, Delhi to London, let's say you're doing a direct flight from Delhi to London with one of the Indian airlines, you now have to spend extra time going around, getting your aircraft to the right place at the right time, getting crews to the right place at the right time. So all of these things, from logistics through to personnel, are affected even if you're not stopping in those places in the Middle East. But people travelling to Australia or Southeast Asia, most of the time, if they're going from Europe or London, or anywhere in the UK for that matter, they are stopping and transiting in the Middle East, and they can't do that now.
And which are the routes that are mostly affected by this current crisis?
So the three main airports that are really significant are Doha, which is Qatar Airlines. Then you've got Etihad, which fly via Abu Dhabi, and you've got Emirates, which fly via Dubai. Dubai is the busiest transit airport in the world. 250,000 passengers pass through it every day. And with those three, and when you add on Bahrain, which is Gulf Air, you've got 500,000 transit passengers a day that are not able to take those routes. So you've got about 2,000 flights a day that I think go through some of those. I can't remember if that's just through Dubai or through all of them together. That's a lot of flights that aren't going. And so it's having a huge effect on Southeast Asia, because and aircraft don't just fly the same route all of the time. You might be going from, I don't know, say Bangkok to Dubai to London to Dubai and then to Singapore. I can't remember exactly which, but let's say you got one of those aircraft. Those aircraft are stuck over on the area that's far away from their base and their headquarters. So it's really challenging to unlock the whole system.
And how quickly can airlines adapt when something like this happens?
There isn't really a precedent for this. The closest was the volcanic ash cloud. I don't know if you remember this. I think it was 2010. There was a volcanic eruption in Iceland, and it made it impossible to fly through parts of the Atlantic, through Europe. It just basically messed up air travel for everybody because it became unsafe. And that took a long time to unlock, but it was temporary. There was the eruption, and then the eruption stopped. We don't know how long this is going to last for. It's up to basically the United States and Israel, how long they want to keep doing this. What's going to, I suspect, start happening is airlines are just going to plan for it not going back to normal. If this conflict goes on for 6 months, which sometimes President Trump suggests, or 2 weeks, sometimes President Trump suggests, airlines can't back themselves on that. So carriers that aren't one of those 3 or 4 Gulf state carriers, they're just going to make plans to reroute and then change their scheduling at their destination airport. So they will eventually just have to plan out those stops for whatever they're doing in their scheduling, I suspect. For passengers and travellers, people are going to start to just find alternatives. So a couple of really good examples. Finnair, for example, from Helsinki, one of the best connected airlines in the world. They were doing this long before Etihad, Emirates and Qatar were doing that sort of transit hub model. They fly over the North Pole. So they fly over the top of Russia. Because, of course, most European or Western airlines can't fly over Russia because of sanctions. So all of that airspace, basically from Siberia down to the bottom of Saudi Arabia, is now blocked out. Istanbul's another option. Turkish airlines have been using Turkey as a hub, Ankara or Istanbul, to go round that space. So I suspect other airlines will start to ask those airports if they can use their capacity as well. And yet travellers will just switch to other airlines.
And Changi, Singapore, is that a viable option?
Yeah, it definitely is. And the challenge for aircraft is that they now have to go so much either further south. They have to go down round the closed airspace. So it just takes a bit of extra time, and that has this impact on scheduling.
Do you think that people are now choosing just different destinations?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a couple of different reasons. One is the logistics. One's not wanting to get stuck somewhere. The other is sentiment. So there are some airlines, for example, that can fly over Russia, Chinese airlines. But people will be less likely to choose them for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to support the breaking of Russian sanctions. Two, there is the memory of what happened when the Russians shot down a jet over Donbass. You don't want to be in an airspace where you've got trigger-happy air defense crews. So I think people might just, even though the risk is very, very low, people just won't want to do it. And people, if they do get stuck somewhere, they'd rather get stuck somewhere where there are lots of alternatives back. I mean, I remember when the ash cloud happened for Iceland, I was in Switzerland doing work, but I was able to get back by the Eurostar train and then train. So there's lots of ferries and lots of other options. Whereas if you're stuck in India or Singapore or Thailand, you're not getting back to the UK anytime quickly. So I think people will start to make those sorts of decisions to mitigate that sort of risk for themselves.
And do you think that it will eventually end up making long-haul travel less attractive?
I think so, but we have pretty short memories on things. COVID's a slightly different case, but there's definitely what's known as revenge tourism. Everyone just wanted to travel as much as possible once COVID finished. But cheap airfares, cheap destinations, they're pretty appealing. You know, Thailand, for example, has become a really popular alternative destination to Spain or the Canary Islands for British tourists because it's affordable. Once you got there on the flight, which, it's a couple £100 per person extra on the flight, but once you get there, it's lovely, it's warm, really interesting culture, amazing food, and not very expensive accommodation. So it will take a while for people to want to go back to that sort of thing. I think opportunities will really exist for places like Norway, which is a great alternative to, I don't know, New Zealand or another big adventure destination, that people will just say, well, it's only just over there, it's a couple of hours flight. If it all goes wrong, I can get a train or a ferry back.
I wonder if the world's aviation routes could start dividing along political lines.
I think they already are. And as we've seen with the situation with Russia, as a product of the sanctions, we can't overfly it that way. And so there's not real connection there. With the Gulf and Middle East countries, I'm not sure how much that would shift because we have really good business ties. They're largely allied to Western countries. There's not that kind of political division there. Would China be incentivized to politicize their routes? I'm not really sure. I think it's just that people might end up just traveling a bit more locally because it's lower risk and because their sentiment has changed. They want to go to places where they feel a more affinity, perhaps, whether or not that really, when it meets the reality of where people want to go on holiday and how much they want to spend, I think people are quite willing to put their sort of morals aside.
And I mean, so do you think we could end up then with sort of different travel spheres, one perhaps centered on Russia, one on China, one on the Middle East and so on?
What, in terms of where people go? Maybe. I mean, if it becomes really difficult to travel to Southeast Asia for a long time, then the tourism and travel industry will change its offers as those products become less available. That's probably something would happen. But I don't know if that's really political or just that it becomes too difficult to do it. And as I said, I don't think China, for example, is incentivized to politicize that space. I just think if there is conflict, it just makes travel much more difficult.
So how much is the travel business having to adapt now? And is this something that was going to come anyway? Was the travel industry looking at ways to, perhaps because of global warming and just a difference in the way that people spend money, was it going to adapt anyway? And in which direction is it going?
So I think there's a lot of different aspects of sustainability. There's the carbon footprint. Of course, air travel is one of the biggest contributors as an individual you can make to your carbon use a year. Then there's social sustainability. Does the form of travel you're doing help or hinder the society that you're visiting? So we've seen really bad examples ranging from child sexual exploitation in places like Cambodia, actually in many tourist destinations that occurs, of course, but most significantly, those are the places we think of that really malign form of tourism. And then there's accidental things that most travelers are unaware of. For example, staying in hotels in Jamaica, which means that locals don't get access to the beach. That's a social negative. And then there's other opportunities of travel that does a lot of benefit for the society that you're visiting, ranging from local businesses to lots of revenue coming in to people having the opportunity to open hotels and improve their standard of living and create opportunity. So you've got all of those different things. So that's the sort of sustainability aspect. I think there's a lot of people in parts of the tourism industry that are talking about those sorts of things and implementing policies that we're doing that already. Whether or not that feeds through to buying decisions by tourists is a different matter. And I think often price and destination has an impact. But when you simply cannot do something because of conflict or inaccessibility to an airspace, those tourism operators have to find an alternative. People still want to go on holiday. And if people can't go to Thailand, they will go to, maybe North Africa. North Africa, safe place to go. There's really good tourism opportunities. Places like Marrakesh have really evolved. Algeria is really growing as a tourism destination at the moment. So I suspect from here in the UK in particular, people will start to focus more on Europe, North Africa as a destination. The United States is an interesting case as well. They've got this big PR opportunity for tourism with the Football World Cup coming up. And at the same time, the way America's been behaving internally and internationally means that people are just less positive about the United States. So they might look for other places to go. They've been making visas more difficult. There's the fact that they will check your social media for the last 5 years. We don't know what impact that will have on them permitting you into the country or not. And so I think for all of those reasons, we don't have a lot of time and money to go on holiday. Holidays are expensive. Most of us have jobs that are full time. We've got rent, we've got a mortgage, we've got kids, we've got food, cost of living. It's all going up. The last thing you want is for those 1 week or 2 weeks or 5 days that you've put aside to go on holiday to think that you're going to have to fly back and take an extra week going via some ridiculous route and spend £2,500. So people will, I think, say, I just don't want to take the risk. Let's stick in Europe as a destination.
Just going back to the Middle East before we close, as you say, we have no idea how long this conflict is going to last. Now, we do know that Iran has assured Gulf countries that it has stopped striking them. But of course, we don't know if that's true or not. But if it is a while before they reopen, how do they go about rebuilding? How do you bring tourists back to a place that has been damaged, not only physically, but reputationally?
Absolutely. And even though the Iranian president said that they wouldn't strike Gulf countries, they have actually struck some Gulf countries since that statement. So how much can you trust what's said? He said, my words were misinterpreted. So that's not really going to help confidence. And flights are starting to come out of those Gulf and Middle East countries. So people are getting out. That big block of people that were stuck there is diminishing. But those countries, and I'll use Dubai as the strongest example, has really built its reputation on safety, security and dependability. You have constraints on your freedom of expression there. You have constraints on the way you can express yourself as a person, sexuality and so on. That means that there are limits on what you can do there. But the kind of deal was that you get zero to very little income tax. You get support from the government, and it's safe and secure. Now, that safety and security has diminished. The UAE has spent a lot of time building up that reputation, and that's what Iran is going after. They know that if they damage that, those countries might start to pressure the US politically. But for the people who've been going there over the last 10 years for that quality of life, for that low income tax, and we've seen influencers and people moving there saying the UK is not safe, I don't like the way my tax is being spent, all this sort of thing. Well, those countries don't look very safe now. And they've used influencers as a way to push that message very cleverly, very creatively, really. It's legitimate softbound strategic communications. They've even funded influencers to go out there, set up structures and training centers and headquarters, and given them free access to podcast studios and film studios and training. Will those influencers want to go back there now when there's that potential risk to life? Will this damage it in the long term, or will people really just admit that what they were after was the low tax? I don't know. But if the business opportunities there are shut down for a long period of time because there's no air travel, there's some brilliant arts and cultural festivals that have relocated to that area because they've had good tax breaks, because it's easy for people from all around the world to get there. If those things stop happening, then they will find alternative destinations. So instead of, the Dubai Lit Fest, will it become the Istanbul Lit Fest or another Istanbul Lit Fest? Where will people go to do these things? And in 5 years, in a year, let's say there's a year where it's blocked, people will just find alternatives, and it'll be very hard for UAE and Dubai to pull those businesses and those visitors, those influencers back in.
I'm meant to go to the Abu Dhabi book fair next month, and I'm just not sure if that's going to happen. And a lot of people have said to me, well, it's your decision, go or don't go. But of course it's not, because of travel insurance.
Exactly. So here in the UK, we've got the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office that issues travel advice. And if you're traveling anywhere, even if it's to Spain, always check the FCDO website for travel advice, and it's cultural advice, all those sorts of things. But we have a traffic light system. So when you look on the website, it will show a map, or it won't show a map. If it doesn't show a map, it usually means that it's advised that all travel is fine. There's no real risk. And the reason why they would change travel advice is for things like security, natural disasters, social unrest, things that could put you at risk. So from the green, which is all travel is fine, it then goes to yellow, which advises against all but essential travel, to red, which is advises against all travel. When a country, or even a region within a country, and places like Egypt are particularly interesting for this because they've got some areas that are green, some that are amber, some that are red. When it switches from green to yellow, then your travel insurance is invalidated. So anything that happens to you there, you can't then get back that travel insurance because you've been advised against travel. So, you're not all places that are yellow are literally unsafe to travel to. I've traveled to some in the past in my work as a journalist, but I've usually had special insurance to do that. For holidays or for business, that's where it really starts to fall down. And the longer those places stay yellow, the longer people planning for their next trip. So that you've got the short-term trips like you're talking about, where there's a decision. But next year, it would just be, I just won't plan to go. I'll find something else to do with that time.
And finally, Ash, what does this all mean for the idea of a globally connected world?
I think it reminds us of how fragile global connection is, that it's dependent on sentiment, that it's dependent on the decisions of big powers, and it's dependent on nature and the weather. There are plenty of places that used to be very popular tourist destinations that are there's much less positive sentiment towards traveling there because of climate change, political change, weather that's been driven by climate change. So these things change very quickly. We saw during COVID, or even the close of the Suez Canal, that it doesn't take much for that global system to get bunged up. But at the same time, we've also seen great innovation of people finding new routes around. The airline industry will find routes around this block zone. The businesses and companies that have been using those hubs in the Middle East for business or events or book fairs will find other places to do it. So there will be adaptation, even if those places are closed off for a little while.
Ash, thank you so much.
Welcome.